All right, good morning, everybody. It is Jay again, and today we're going to be talking about one of my not only favorite trees, but one of the trees that I think is absolutely necessary if you want to create a food forest in Phoenix, Arizona, or other areas where it's extremely hot and dry. So this is going to cover LA, this is going to cover Vegas, this is going to cover New Mexico. This is going to cover all those regions where it's really, really hot and dry, and you're wanting to not only conserve water, but maybe you're wanting to build a food forest, or maybe you're wanting to just give yourself a little bit of shade. So we're going to be talking about the benefits of the mulberry tree, and I'm going to be looking at a couple of them here to show you what they look like, and indeed how big they get, and what to expect when planting a mulberry. This is a question I get more than anything is mulberry questions. Okay, so I thought I'd do a little video here on just mulberries because it is the start of the season, guys, and this is going to be the first fruit of the year besides citrus. Okay, so that is the first benefit right there, is that this will provide the earliest fruit for you in your yard as far as spring goes. Like I said, I'm not counting citrus. That's going to be a little bit earlier in the year. Okay, so it gives you very, very early fruit. So if you are a beginner and you're wanting to put a tree in and get some gratification sometime soon, I would say put in a mulberry, because these will produce, even as a very small tree, even smaller than these trees right here, which we'll talk about also. So mulberries, they're going to be your ultimate largest tree in your yard. Okay, overall, by the time they get fully grown, they are going to be the largest. So I've got some trees here for scale, so you guys can see how big that these are going to get and what to expect out of them. So here I have a whole line of mulberries. I sell hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mulberry trees. Okay, these are in 15-gallon. These are in 15-gallon pots. Okay, and you can see that they are just not only beautiful but large. These are about, well, they're taller than me, so I'm 6 foot. A lot of these are getting on up to the 8-foot point, which is really nothing for a mulberry. Okay, so I have these actually sitting. These are nursery trees, but these are actually sitting near one of my first mulberry trees. So we'll just go ahead and go over this one while we're right here, so you guys can see scale, like I said. So let me back up just a little bit here. Pan over here to one of my mulberry trees, and then we'll start to go up here. And you can see that that is a very, very large tree. So we're up to about 50 foot in height, and we're probably around a 30-foot spread on this one here. And what this does, and this happens to be a multi-grafted mulberry, but what this happens to do is this happens to shade the entire nursery in the summertime. So as the sun approaches the top of the sky there, it's going to cast a shadow that ultimately covers the nursery all the way to the end. So it pretty much shades a lot of this stuff during the summer when it's needed. And of course, it's going to go dormant, and they're going to lose their leaves during the winter, which allows all that sunlight to come back into the nursery. So this is one that you can kind of plan to use as an afternoon shade tree, okay, especially for your tropical trees. Most of my tropicals are going to be back here, which we'll talk about another mulberry here in just a second. Let me see if I can not throw myself askew. Okay, so what is this particular tree? Well, this is a white mulberry up at the top there, and then I grafted on some purple Pakistani branches down here on the bottom. So the top of the tree is one variety, and all these lower branches that kind of weep down a little bit, these are a different variety. And what's really interesting about this is that this tree has changed the color of the fruit. So this was a purple Pakistani that I grafted on to this tree. Right? And so it was purple for the first couple of years. And then it has now actually changed the fruit of this tree, of these lower branches, and now they are white. So they started out purple, the long purple Pakistanis, and they were purple for the first couple of years, and now they've turned white. So now the entire tree is a white mulberry. There's just two different kinds on this same tree, which is very interesting because on other trees that you graft, it keeps that original parentage through whatever that branch was. So like if you graft on a Florida Prince peach to another peach, well, it's always going to be a Florida Prince. It's really never going to change its genetics, whereas this tree has. And I've had this do it on a couple other ones also. So it starts out as one thing, and then it becomes another because it's running through this tree. And it's getting a lot of the DNA and genetic material from the original tree, which apparently it has now put into the berries. So this is now a white mulberry. And this is one that I do sell at the nursery. And you can really tell the difference between them by their leaves. So let me go over this real quick. So when you get a white mulberry, it is going to have these leaves. See this kind of this tri-lobe leaf, or you'll get like a five-point leaf, and they're a little bit smaller, so they don't quite burn so much in the sun. So that's why white mulberry is really good for the valley. And not only that, but it doesn't have a color to the fruit, meaning the fruit juice is not going to splatter all over your driveway and your cars and birds pooping. And so this would be great for, like, say, I don't know, maybe an HOA where they don't allow mulberries because they don't like all the staining and all the problems with all the juice. So maybe this would be one that you could consider for maybe doing in an HOA, okay? So this is going to be the white mulberry. The next one here I'm going to show you is going to be the Pakistan mulberry. And the Pakistan mulberry is going to have a much larger leaf. Okay, that's a Pakistan here. You can tell by that single leaf. Here's another one back here. You can tell by that single leaf that you've got a purple Pakistan, and they're going to be a lot larger than the white ones are. And the advantage of the Pakistanis and the white mulberries is that they are going to grow nice and upright for you, and you hardly ever have to prune on them or work on them or do much to them. Now you can chop these trees down to the ground and let them completely start back over whenever you feel like it. You can just cut. Mulberries don't mind pruning, so you can cut on these and kind of take branches out that you want to allow certain amounts of light back in to your food forest. So you will be doing that, especially on some of these darker mulberries where it gets really, really dark underneath these, and nothing's going to grow underneath this. Okay, so this is too much shade or too dark, not enough light. But what this does is this is the afternoon break for my tropical trees back there on the side. So there's really not much actually growing under it, which we'll walk under this here in just a little bit. It's more providing afternoon shade on the afternoon side. So it's cooling down all the plants that I have, the tropical trees that are over here in this area. And if it weren't for them, I wouldn't have those tropical trees. Okay, so purple Pakistani, nice tall upright tree just like the white ones here, not much pruning on them. We can go look at one of these. I've got one of these in the ground also. So let's just take a walk over here because we are going to be talking about this other one also. But let's start back over here where the purple Pakistani is. Okay, so I've got a nice big one here, and you can tell once again, by these nice big single lobed leaves. On the Pakistani, you can always tell them because they're gonna have a little bit of like a hairy surface, so they kind of feel like kind of like cardboard, I guess, when they're hardened off and when they're a little bit more mature. And so that's why the Pakistanis do so well in desert areas or where it's a little bit hotter. These things are going to grow like a weed. You can see that this is a pretty good sized tree too. Let's get down here by the trunk. He's a pretty good sized tree too. And this one I ritualistically kind of sacrifice to allow some more light back in to the food forest that's back here in the back. So you're always regulating light is what you're doing when you're dealing with fruit trees and food forests, is you're always looking for how much light's penetrating to the forest floor below it. And do you have plants that will take that kind of environment? Because some plants will take that extreme shade, but for the most part they don't like it. Most plants are going to need some sunlight. Okay, now this happens to be an autumn olive that's growing underneath this, and these don't mind a little bit of shade, so he's kind of filling in this lower section here. But this tree got huge, like absolutely enormous. This one probably got 40 feet, and I just cut this one back, and of course he is restarted because you can't really kill a mulberry. He's just going to put on all new branches and leaves and fruit for next year. Okay, so I'm skipping the fruit on this one this year because he got heavily pruned, and he's not going to grow with new fruit on the branches when you prune them like that. He's going to have to grow back this next year, and then he'll be full of fruit like the other ones. Okay, so far we've covered a white, we've covered the Pakistani. Now let's start to look at some of these Shangri-Las, because these Shangri-Las are in a little bit different of a class of mulberries. So these are considered tropical mulberries, and these you don't want to wake up too early or they could possibly freeze. But they are definitely worth it, and they are one of my favorite trees here in my yard, and you'll see that by how many of these that I do actually have planted. Okay, so this is a Shangri-La mulberry, and the shade from this tree is 100%. So no light gets through the canopy of this tree. This is so dark and dense with foliage. And it's funny too, because none of the mulberries are on the outside. You have to look for them. Like, they are buried underneath all these weeping branches. So the Shangri-La mulberry, which is the tropical mulberry, you got to remember this is going to grow a little bit more like a weeping tree. So you will be pruning a lot more on this tree and also working it to become what you want it to be. And what I mean by that is, this is actually a bush. Okay, so the Shangri-La mulberry is actually just a giant shrub bush, right? So if you want to make this into a tree, you have to train it into a tree. So you're going to have to take one stem, and you're going to have to stake that up so that it stays a nice single trunk tree for you. So like I said, the shade underneath this tree is absolute 100%. Dark, 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 but also lush and green, and the amount of mulberries these things put on is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, these don't joke around. Look at all the fruit. I know it's not ripe yet, but it will be here soon. They're starting to ripen up now. So this one is going to be a purple colored fruit or a black colored fruit. And this is going to taste very much like a blackberry. So people always ask me, what do these taste like? Well, the closest you could say to a Shangri-La would be a blackberry. And then the true, the Pakistani mulberry is going to taste like a true mulberry, which if you've never had one, it's very, very hard to describe that wonderful flavor. So let me back up a little bit from this tree so you can see it and see the size. So hopefully this makes sense to everyone. This is about 40 foot to the top of this Shangri-La, and it spreads wide. So it is a weeper. You can see that it is a weeper. So you are going to be constantly kind of cutting these out of your way so you can walk, because they're going to droop all the way back down to the ground, and they're going to droop on top of other plants that might be full sun plants, and you might not want shade on those plants. But I tell you, it'll drop it probably 20 degrees underneath this tree in the summertime, because the amount of shade and the amount of humidity that these trees provide. So sitting right next to each other here, you can see that the Pakistani is actually just a little bit taller than this one here, but they're both extremely tall trees. And keep in mind too that these are still very young. These trees are less than 10 years old. You got to remember, these are going to live for quite a while, so they're going to get quite a bit bigger and start to fill in giant areas of the sky, which you may or may not want. If you don't want that, remember, you can always hack them completely back, like I did this mulberry, and let it start back over again and provide shade and fruit right there where you can reach it again. So don't feel like you can't prune on these trees. Okay, so Shangri-La, nice tall tree. Pakistani, huge tree. Okay, now let's go to the front, and we're going to look at a couple more, because like I said, I've got these kind of sprinkled all over the place, because these are what I started with to give me all this wonderful shade and cooling effect. So let's go up and take a look at those. Okay, so now we are actually in the front yard, and I've got 3 of them up here I would like to go over. Man, this one has gotten a little bit out of control. So here's one here in the front. And you can see I keep him a little bit shorter, and by a little bit shorter, I mean like 15 to 20 foot. So he is still a very good sized tree and a very wide tree. And you can see he kind of weeps over onto the side and kind of drags onto other trees. And you're going to have to prune him constantly. But the amount of the benefits, though, just outweigh the detriments. I mean, these leaves are huge, and these aren't even the biggest ones yet. So these are going to get probably 2 to 3 times bigger, these leaves get, okay? And dense. I mean, I cannot even get in here, probably, right? It's just so thick and dense in here, and fruit. I mean, the berries are starting to ripen up on this one also. And this one is on the afternoon side, so he is virtually in my front yard. Man, it's hard to get these things in scale, because I just don't think people understand what they're getting themselves into, and that could be a good or a bad thing. But just lush, beautiful, green. Oh my gosh, you never see anything like these. Like, look at these. These things suffer from nothing. No salt burn. Even the wind we were getting the other day didn't burn them, and it usually does. I mean, we got a little bit on some of these, the edges of some of these leaves. That's wind burn, especially when they're trying to leaf out during the heavy winds. You'll get a little bit of distortion on some of the leaves because they are so big and they dry off. And remember, this tree isn't as hard, isn't as hardy, I would say, as the Pakistani, but I would say comparable fruit-wise, they're both excellent. Okay, let's come over here and let's look at another one. So I've got one over here just to the side of it. Man, it's so dark, I don't even know if this is filming, but this is planted directly underneath a pine tree. And what I wanted it to do is I wanted it to kind of fill in the bottom of this pine tree, which it has definitely done. The pine tree starts up here. So it's filling in all this lower canopy here where all this dragon fruit is. But man, same situation. Like, these things are just, oh, they just get gnarly. There's the trunk on this one. Pretty good sized trunk, very sturdy. Very, very sturdy trees. Fruit, of course. Oh. These are some of the first fruits. These get way bigger as the season goes on and these ripen up. Here, Mango. Dogs love them. Mango, you want the first one? Then you want it? Here, I'll split it open for you. There. Spoiled brats. Okay. So nice, lush, and it actually in here you can kind of see the dragon fruit and the pine tree just kind of buried in all this shade, which keeps it nice and cool because that's what dragon fruit like. So I've got these two nice big trees right next to each other. They say you can't plant things close, but man, can you? Okay, so yeah, pine tree, dragon fruit. Now what this one is going to do is this one provides shade for everything down on this side. So they're being used for their canopy, they're being used for their fruit. Livestock, birds love them. I mean, the benefits of, I mean, geez. You just pick up these branches and there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of fruits underneath these. And so, see, the birds can't really see them. They're kind of hidden. So that is one advantage of this, of the Shangri-La over the Pakistani, is it hides a lot of its fruit. And way up in here where birds can't really get. They're not going to get in here. It's too thick for them. They don't like it. They can't escape. So, like, they're going to pretty much stay out of this one. Now, they are going to get a lot of your Pakistanis. I will tell you that, because they're just right out there in the open where everybody can see them. They're not hidden like the Shangri-La hides its fruit. So, which one would I get of all these? Well, multiple. I mean, I guess that's the answer to the question, is multiple, and it depends on what you're doing, right? So if you're trying to add some lush, dark humidity to your yard, and you're wanting to do a bunch of tropical trees, then the Shangri-La is going to be the better choice for you, because this is a water-loving tree, doesn't care for the cold too much, and is going to give you these just gigantic leaves that are going to provide a lot of humidity for your other type of tropical tree plants, like this Chiku sapote that's right next to this plant, okay? Or the citrus that's next to these. They're all helping each other out, okay? Now, which one would I choose if I had a full sun open yard and nothing else there? Well, it'd be the Pakistani. And you can actually see it from the front yard here. It is a large tree. Large tree, and what it does is it gets things established, right? So that you can grow other type of fruit trees, things that might be a little bit more sensitive or might burn a little bit, like these star fruits. Man. So it cools them and it keeps them from burning, and it also keeps them from freezing. Okay? So if you're wanting to get to tropical fruit trees in particular, okay, in particular, that's what you're wanting. Wow. Man, look at these branches. They're just drugged to the ground. Oh my gosh, with starfruit. If you're wanting to get to these type of plants, you're going to want to probably pick a Shangri-La. If you have a more open area that's more desert or larger, okay, half acre and up, let's call it, okay, then your biggest benefit is going to be the Pakistani. If you've got smaller yards, you can keep this Shangri-La controlled a lot better than you can that that Pakistani. And so now this one is going to grow and is going to provide some shade for my patio here. I've got this one just, oh my gosh, guys, drops 10 degrees just getting next to the street. 10 degrees. Look, lays all over the ground, right? Cools all this area underneath here. Like, look at this. Just to get down to the ground. Right? So it keeps it cool and it preserves water. Okay? These can be drought tolerant once established, but everything needs to get established, and really every fruit tree is drought tolerant once established. Okay? That's, I don't even know where we got that from. How did we get to this point? Just kidding. So yeah, guys, if you're wanting especially tropical type yards, split it between the two. Do the Shangri-La. If you've got hot, open, full sun, do that one. Now, let's talk about something else here. Let's talk about potted mulberries, because I watch a lot of videos on plants myself, and one of the videos I run across the most is mulberries and growing them in pots, and you can't grow them in pots, or you shouldn't grow them in pots, or they are too big of a tree to grow in a pot, or they will never fruit in a pot, or, I mean, you got to remember, people are going to come up with excuses for everything. So really the biggest thing to growing a mulberry in a pot is you're going to have to pick a big enough pot first off. And then the second major part of this is you can't set it on the ground. You got to put something underneath it. So you either got to put bricks underneath it, or you got to put a paver underneath it, or you got to put something underneath it, or else what'll happen is it's going to grow into the ground. So if you've got mulberry trees and you see them sitting out on a property, like at a nursery, or for instance, chances are if they're sitting there on the ground, or if they're sitting there on, like, say, weed cloth, chances are they have grown into the ground. Okay, so oftentimes you'll go wiggle those pots, and the nursery has left them there so long that a little root has grown out of that pot and has now tapped into the ground. So then this is exactly what happens next. Okay, so they pull that out of the ground, or they cut that out of the ground for you, and you're going to take that mulberry tree home, and it's going to start to decline, and it may even die within, let's say, a week. Now, why would that happen? Because you severed the taproot that more than likely has grown out of their pot and has grown into the ground and is now relying on all that nutrition that it's tapped into. So the second you take those mulberry trees and you basically rip them back out of the ground again, well, then you got to start all over with them again. So it might be a couple more months before they re-leaf again. And if that happens in the middle of the summer, that's probably the death of them, because they got so reliant on that water that they were tapped into and that soil that they were tapped into. So one of the major things that you need to remember on growing mulberry trees in a pot is going to be big enough pot, and make sure you do not set that on the soil. Put it on something else. So let's go look at some of these. Okay, so let's talk about mulberry trees in pots. And remember, one of the biggest things on that is a large enough pot, okay? So you can see that this mulberry here is in a 25-gallon pot, okay? So the bigger the better, obviously. Now you can see that this one's got a pretty good sized trunk in this potted tree. Let's travel up this tree here. And you can see that's a pretty good sized tree for a mulberry in a pot. So it is almost up to 15 foot. The top of that black railing is 15 foot. So it's almost 15 foot tall. It's got about a 6 foot spread here. I kind of keep him pruned a little bit. And then of course it is sitting on concrete so that those roots do not grow into the ground. You may get a couple little mulch roots grow out of the holes and form a little mat, and that's because they're sucking up all the water and nutrition that's right outside the pot on them. But you're not going to get a big taproot that comes out the side. So can you grow mulberries in pots? Like, if I don't have enough room and I still want to enjoy a mulberry tree, well, absolutely. So you can see one here, and I would have started this earlier if I had caught that video on growing them in mulberries. So this one's been in the pot for about three and a half years, which is when I first saw that video on you can't grow mulberries in pots, or you shouldn't, or there's just no way to do them. I've seen people yanking these things out of the ground and just, oh man, it's just a nightmare. Okay, so Pakistani, you can absolutely grow in a pot. Shangri-La is going to be the same situation. I've got some here at a 15, which I will be up-stepping these into 25s as they grow. But you can see that this one's already got some good height to him, as do the rest of these trees in here. Pakistanis will absolutely grow in a pot, but remember, having that kind of floppy behavior, you're going to be kind of staking these up, because remember, they have no strength to speak of until they get a little bit older. And you can see that they even fruit in pots. Okay, that's too small of a pot he's fruiting in, but he'll even fruit in that size pot. Okay, so let's go over here and walk down these. And you can see that these are all trained a little bit more like a tree, which is easier to keep that shape on the Pakistanis and the whites. So you can see that these are all just perfect little columnar trees. Got fruit on them. And then now they're starting to divide their canopies so that you could walk under these. So I kind of train these to be walkable under. So I try to scalp these up and get these up to a good height so that the canopy is above you. Work that tree up, especially on a Pakistani or a white. And the white ones, especially at this nursery, they're going to stay white. So if you bought a white mulberry here, it's going to stay white. It's never going to turn red or purple. It's gonna rot and fall off the tree before that happens. And the white ones, to me, taste exactly like honeydew melon. So if you like honeydew melon, I think that you would really, really enjoy the white berries. But you can see I just keep these nice, perfect, straight trees on the whites and the Pakistanis. And I kind of spread them throughout the nursery everywhere, because the mulberries, obviously, if they'll help you in the yard, then they'll definitely help you in a nursery type environment. So I've actually got these kind of spread out all throughout the nursery in different areas, because when the heat comes and the sun comes, these are what kind of saves all my other fruit trees during that heat. Man, these peaches look good, right? They look good because they're getting cooled down a little bit by that tree that is behind me. Otherwise, it would be pretty hot here right now, and you tend to cook a lot of plants. So they're considered nurse trees, guys. You're gonna get your yard started, okay? And if it weren't for them, I would not have this yard. It's tough in Arizona to grow things. Very, 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 very tough. Okay. Now let's go over a couple more of these, because mulberries, they come in oh my gosh, they come in at least 50 varieties that I can think of. You've got whites, and you've got pinks, and you've got greens, and you've got reds, and you've got purples, and you've got blacks, and then you've got them from every region in the world. Some come from Japan. These are Japanese mulberries. So these have that really beautiful, like, kind of crinkly leaf. Do you guys see that leaf pattern? That's natural. That's not that's not it crinkling up from the heat. That's what these leaves look like. They look like little pom-poms. So there are very unique varieties of mulberry also. This being one of them. Very, very, very unique. Oddball. And he's a little bit of a smaller tree. He's kind of naturally a dwarf, so this is definitely one that you could keep in a pot. And then, of course, there are dwarf varieties. Like if you're wanting something that's going to stay a little bit more like a small shrub or a bush, maybe you don't have the room for something quite as large as these mulberries. Well, then you can go with a bush type of mulberry. And there are mulberries that fruit in the spring, and there are mulberries that fruit in the fall, as far as the dwarf varieties go. So you can also add to your harvest, extend your harvest a little bit. Don't get all your mulberries in the spring. Get some of them in the fall. Okay, so there's dwarf varieties also. You can keep them in pots. So that pretty much covers everybody, and like every excuse I think that I can think of for not wanting to put in a mulberry or not wanting to add a mulberry. Now, I will tell you that HOA neighborhoods, which there are the majority of those, let's call it here, especially in Arizona, let's call it, okay? Let's say 80% of clients that I have are going to be in an HOA neighborhood. And so these trees are restricted in your HOA neighborhoods, right? Because you can't have all this shade and food in Arizona. That makes no sense. So we got to do the opposite of that, you know, and be barren and hot and have to crank your air conditioning. I've pretty much eliminated my air conditioning because of all these plants and trees around this house has kept this so cool that now we don't even have to do that. And you might think, well, you're spending all this money on water then. And it's like, no, once these trees get established, they don't use water like that anymore. So my water bill for 1,000 fruit trees is right around 150 bucks a month because of the way that it's designed. So you can see that there's no sun in here at all, right? Because the trees are the canopy and they're the ones keeping it cool in here, and they're keeping it from evaporating. Okay. So it just stays nice and cool in here at all times. You're not evaporating. You're not losing the water that you put in. You're holding it all in. Okay. Like I just don't get people in Arizona. It's like they don't want to water, and they say they overwater things and all these problems. And it's like, guys, you live in the hottest place in the world. Like, look at Hawaii or Florida, okay, where it rains all the time and it's humid all the time and it's hot all the time. That's what plants like, okay? So just because we don't like those conditions all the time, might be a little too humid for us in Florida, the plants grow like crazy. So they like it, whether you do or not, okay? So I think I've killed all excuses for planting a mulberry tree and why you wouldn't. And the benefits completely outweigh the detriments. And like I said, if you're ever wanting to get especially, now listen, if you're especially wanting to get to things like avocados, boop, or mangoes, and keep those two in mind in particular. Those two in particular. Okay? Mangoes, you're going to need some of those trees, okay, if you want to make it easy on yourself and you don't want to struggle. You're going to need to add a few of these trees, which give you that nice cooling effect in the afternoon. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to people now, and that's why I scream the benefits of getting a mulberry tree, because of all those benefits. Okay, so to recap real quick, and then I am going to let you guys go for your day. So the biggest tree, this is going to be one of the biggest trees in your yard, okay? The biggest spread, the biggest height. This is going to give you the most shade if you're wanting to cool your yard down, okay? If you're wanting a desert type tree, it's going to be the Pakistani. If you're wanting a more tropical type tree, it's going to be the Shangri-La, okay? That's the exceptions. The white acts very much like the purple. So if you're wanting something tall, go with the white. It is also non-staining. There's dwarf varieties of all kinds. They're not my favorite because the berries are small, so I do prefer the larger trees. The smaller berries are a little bit more like bird food, so I do like having a larger tree, just keeping it smaller, keeping it sized. Animals, birds, dogs, everything loves these fruit. So you're also giving a little bit back to nature in that regard. All right, guys, that is it for today. I think I have covered as much as I can think of on mulberry trees and the benefits behind them. If you can't for some reason plant one of these, well, there are alternatives to this, but they are going to be, well, in my case, they're going to be fruit choices. You know, like pear trees. A pear tree is also a very upright growing tree that can provide fruit and shade and do almost the same benefits as a mulberry. Also a moringa. A moringa is also another good choice. In fact, you can see that these guys are my afternoon flags. So mulberry, moringa, pear. These are the ones that's saving everything behind it. See that massive mango? That massive mango is being shaded by this pear in the afternoon. Okay? Can you do it without it? Sure. You can. Here's another big mango. Huge mango. Flowering all into the neighbor's yard, basically. So can it be done without it? Well, sure, but then there's other tricks that are needed, like block walls for that shade. Okay? So everything is planned. Everything is planned. All right, guys, that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed that, please put a like and give me a little thumbs up. If you have any comments or any questions on mulberry trees, go ahead and put that also in the comments. But I would say definitely get out and get you some of these if you ever want to build a food forest somewhere where it's hot, like Arizona, the desert, okay? This is one of your biggest benefit trees, okay? All right, guys, that is it. Thank you for watching.